but I wake up every day now, and it is in my consciousness as to, is this, how bad is this going to get? Just leave it at just that question. How bad is it going to get?
It's
And I would love to have some empirical information other than what, they're announcing all the time.
well,
I'd
well,
love to have some other data point to say, well, you know what? The odds are such and such that it's going to get this bad or this bad, or even in brackets, I'd like to
right,
know.
which is why a prediction market would be valuable because I think there's so much just random news, and because nobody has skin in the game, you can write all these crazy articles about all these different theories that are just BS,
Yeah.
and a prediction market would solve a lot of
It would
those
give us some
issues.
it would give us some another data point,
I
right?
mean, we've been obsessed with this too. We've done 3 podcasts now on coronavirus, which is not our thing at all to do topical
Right,
podcasts like that, but it's so much on people's minds. Like I said earlier, it's the only news in the newspaper
right.
right now. You can't even bet on anything else because nothing. It's like the rest of the world's frozen. I used to trade on InTrade back in the mid '00s. It was like I think it was even before they were acquired by Trade Sports, or I forget. It was
Yeah,
always confusing.
yeah,
But
intentionally, yeah.
I've got with me today John Phillips, who's the head of. Would you call yourself the CEO, or you're the head of,
Yeah,
or
I'm one of the co-founders of Predicted.
co-founder of Predicted? I've been obsessed with Predicted. It's a prediction market. I wrote about these things recently, but just to briefly summarize, it's like a stock market of what would you call a stock market where you could predict events and put money on the line. So I could say, I could make a bet that Donald Trump will be reelected, or I can make a bet that Donald Trump will not be reelected. And at any given point, that question will trade on predicted.org, and it'll trade between 0 and 100. And so, for instance, right now, Donald Trump winning the popular vote in 2020 is trading for 26 cents. If you buy 1,000 shares at 26 cents, it means you'll pay $260. And if Donald Trump wins the popular vote, you would get back $1,000. So you would make $740. So that's a brief summary. And you have all sorts of on your market. You have all sorts of things like obviously the presidential election. You have tons of bets. You even have you can bet on how many tweets Donald Trump will make in 2020. You have bets on or things you can bet on relating to the economy and the recession. I did well. Thank you very much, by the way. I did well on Brexit not happening by October 31st. I
Uh-huh.
figured anytime a world leader makes a huge deadline promise, that's a good thing to bet against. So I bet against that.
Right.
But first off, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
And one of the I want to talk about the history of prediction markets and the pros and cons because there are some definite cons. But one of the pros I found, and this is related to have you ever read Nassim Taleb's book Skin in the Game?
No, I have not.
So his idea is that there's all these pundits on TV. We see them every day on coronavirus or Iran or the election, impeachment. But they're all useless. If they don't have skin in the game, is his point, if they don't have actual risk on the table, they're not going to make the best decisions they can make. And so what I found fascinating about predict.org is that once I started, and it's real money you're playing with, once I started playing with it, even though it's small amounts of money, I felt so much more invested in the outcome of these world events, and I'm someone who never reads the news, but I did really intensive research about everything I bet on. Like, I knew nothing about Brexit. I made a bet on the gut feeling that, "Oh, Boris Johnson's just lying here," and it made me intensely research Brexit. I became like an expert on Brexit. So everything, so like when I bet on, and I don't wanna keep bragging, I've had some huge losing bets as well.
Let's talk about those. Yeah.
I bet on both Pete Buttigieg winning in Iowa and Elizabeth Warren winning in Iowa in September. And the reason I bet on those is because again, I wanted to have skin in the game. So knew I was going to make a bet. So I called around to political experts, in particular Phil Stutz, who's a political expert, online campaign manager. He's been on this podcast a bunch of times, and he told me that Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren had the two biggest organizations on the ground in Iowa, and from his experience, and Pete Buttigieg was number fourth in the race then in the polls, but his experience was that whoever has the most basically volunteers on the ground in Iowa would win the primary. So I
Mhm.
bet big on Pete. somewhat big on Elizabeth. She was second in line, and I lost big on the Elizabeth, and I won big on Pete. So I hedged in
Right.
that situation. And right now I'm losing big on Donald Trump winning the popular vote. I bet on him at 41 cents, and it's at 26 cents now because everyone's freaking out about coronavirus. And that this could be the thing that does him in the popular vote. It's unclear, but certainly the prediction markets are betting against him. Uh, so I have 1,000 questions, but maybe tell me about you and how'd you get involved in this?
Sure.
You're
So
one of the
that's
founders, so I didn't know that.
yeah, one of the co-founders really. So I've been in and around the political campaign business for my whole professional life, and it was increasingly obvious that traditional public opinion polling was broken. It was expensive to do with cell phones. It's virtually impossible to get a scientific sample, and we were in the sample business. We provided samples to pollsters, and we're nonpartisan supplier of this kind of campaign technology. And so we were looking for alternatives. And one of the investors in my company, Aristotle, was Bill Hambrecht, who you may know.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Uh, you know, um, I had I didn't have lunch with him. I had lunch with one of his partners right when they were doing the crowdfunding IPOs.
Yes.
It's kind of like almost
Yeah.
like it almost worked. Their IPOs almost worked like a prediction market
Yeah.
actually, and they were very innovative. And I was invested in a company that was going IPO that way. I think even Google was flirting with IPOing using Bill
Yes.
Hambrecht,
That's right.
and maybe explain what he was doing. This is like in 2004. Like what was he
That's
doing?
right.
Yeah,
And Bill's been a venture capitalist. I mean, he was the original founder of Hambrecht and Quist, which was the
yeah,
original technology bank. He
yeah. That
was
was like the
way
first.
ahead of
Yeah, he
spotting the apples and the rest of it.
I
In
mean, he
fact,
took all the Silicon Valley
yeah,
companies public. He
yeah,
became fabulously wealthy from
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. And so Bill, I met Bill. He was confident enough in our business to become our first investor. And one day I was visiting with him as I do frequently still. And he it was before the 2014 election, and he said, you should look at prediction markets. He said, I've been glued to my computer screen on Intrade, which was a predecessor to Predict It. Intrade, of course, just for people who don't know, was an Irish gambling site that was really one of the first in contemporary times. There've been prediction markets of some form or fashion for hundreds and maybe even thousands of years. But Bill was really interested in the outcome of the election, and he had been following Intrade with the data it was producing, and was convinced that markets have predictive ability. Which, of course, is not he's not the first to say that, but being a pioneer in all types of markets. And somebody who puts his money where his mouth is, Bill was sort of visionary in this regard. So he pushed us into it, basically. He's
And by the way, I just want to add, you're right. The fact that I didn't know he was an investor in your company. The fact that he was interested in this is a strong sign. Like you look at Wall Street and the way the markets work, and particularly IPOs, which is when a company is available, goes public, so the public can invest in it. It's a very scammy industry, and in almost 100% of cases, everybody's ripped off except for the bankers,
Yeah.
and it's kind of just commonly accepted that everyone's gonna be ripped off, like, nobody really
Including the
questions it.
company that's going public.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
they're ripped off the most.
Yeah, that's right.
So what Bill did, the innovation he did back in 2004 was to actually fairly price IPOs so that the bankers, including him, would make the least amount of money so that the shareholders in the company can make the most amount of money.
Right.
And so it was he is a really innovative guy, and and that's on top of being the first to kind of start a bank out in Silicon Valley and bring all those
That's right.
companies public. So he seems like, I don't know him, but it seems like he's an honest guy. He seems very innovative. So, and this is, prediction markets, as you mentioned. He was glued to in trade. The prediction markets have been going on since about the 80s. I think there was the University of Iowa election markets that started in 1988.
Mhm.
And so there's a history of this, but then in trade became the dominant one. and then we'll get into the cons of all these things because it
Yeah,
led to the downfall of in trade.
right,
Um, but okay, so I just wanted to mention that about Bill,
right.
that it's not insignificant, that it's not like some random guy was your investor. Like, this is the guy who
He
should be your
Bill
investor.
I mean, Bill changed my life and the life of many other entrepreneurs and people.
How?
Well, I mean, I my younger brother went to MIT. Y I When we both graduated, we basically needed to get work. We needed jobs, and like a lot of people, I think we were probably unemployable.
What'd
But
you major in?
I was a physics major, then aerospace engineering.
Yeah,
Um,
that's useless.
yeah, right, right. But which I haven't really put to use in all the years since. But Bill was, um, he quickly spotted what he thought was a place where the innovation, disruptive innovation was possible, and where he could make a buck. And he's been in this deal for more than 20 years. Um,
Which deal?
the Aristotle deal.
What was Aristotle originally?
So Aristotle was and continues to be one of the pioneering providers of election technology to people on a nonpartisan basis who want to influence decisions at the ballot box. You have a community group, a mosquito. You're running for mosquito board, or you're running for president. Often, you'll be using some technology that Aristotle has created,
Like what?
or
Like what's an
well,
example?
online fundraising. We were the first
Oh,
in the
okay.
online fundraising business. In fact, that the story of that one's another podcast, perhaps. But it was illegal in 1996, and to make a contribution to a political candidate with a credit card. Illegal. And
Why?
the well, the regulators had thought that people. I mean, the theory was that if you allow credit cards to be used for a contribution, then people will make a contribution. They'll have their company reimburse them on the credit card. I mean, it's convoluted. It made no
Oh,
sense
and
whatsoever.
maybe also there could be danger of chargebacks.
Well, maybe, but the point was the internet was just becoming available in campaigns, and the two campaigns that embraced online fundraising, as offered by Aristotle and a direct competitor of ours, a friendly competitor. The two campaigns were John McCain and Bill Bradley, and we took, but they couldn't take contributions online at that point because of this ban on credit cards. And so, with them, we went to the Federal Election Commission and challenged the rule banning credit cards. And almost as an afterthought, they said, "Yes, sure, we'll drop that restriction." Which was the birth of online fundraising from that point
So
forward.
this was 2000?
This was earlier than that. This was in, I want to say it was 96 or 98. Bradley
Oh,
and
oh
and
yeah.
McCain. No, it had
It
to
had
have
to be
been.
92.
It was not 92, because that was Perot was one of the people
Uh,
also. Kind of
uh,
interesting. This is a whole different conversation
no, but
than
it's
than
interesting. I'm
this, but
fascinated by all this stuff.
um, we'll look it up. But bro, you know what? As I'm thinking about this, it had to be prior to 2000.
It had to be 92 because Bradley I didn't know McCain ran in 92. He ran in 2000, but, Bradley ran in 92.
How about 96?
I doubt he would have run against Clinton in the
It's
primaries in
amazing we don't
96
remember this stuff. It seems so real at the time,
because in 96, Clinton was unopposed in the primaries.
Uh, and Bradley, that's right. It was Bradley. It had to have been 92,
And
and
in
and
and by
McCain was
2000,
opposing. Well, but McCain was opposing
Bush.
Bush.
Yeah, so maybe 'cause I remember Bradley joined Allen& and Company as a banker,
Yeah,
basically around 2000, but maybe it was right after, maybe it was either 92 or 2000.
right.
Because if you're talking they were both in the same election, it was 2000.
Yeah,
I can't remember if Bradley ran in 92 or 2000.
yeah,
My trivia knowledge fails me here.
right. Oh, I remember the McCain. I hope this was edited, so it
No,
doesn't
no,
look
it's
like
not,
two
it is all
senile
good.
guys talking to each other. All right, so um, McCain was especially at the forefront, and Bradley was an innovator, but McCain was a fighter, and McCain was at the forefront because the Republican Party was trying to deny him access to register. In addition to this other thing, which was unrelated to the Republican Party, McCain was being denied access to the registered voter rolls in Virginia and a couple of other
Why?
states.
Are they allowed to do
Well,
that?
no, it's unconstitutional, right? There's equal access, equal
Yeah.
protection. But tell that to the Republican Secretary of State or Board of Elections when the fix is in for Bush or whoever it was that that he was fighting against at the time. And that was another fight that went, that went up the court chain, and was resolved in favor of equal access. And from that point forward, and again, this we are in the beginning stages, the infant stages of campaign technology at this point. There really was no widespread use of the internet to speak of at
Yeah.
all. But that's how, anyway, Bill spotted the potential. Back to Hambrick. Bill spotted the potential of disruptive technology in markets, and if you consider an election a market of sorts, where consumers are voting with their vote rather than their pocketbook, he was always very big on sort of leveling the playing field so that the best ideas, rather than the guys with the biggest pocketbook, uh, managed to at least make their voice heard. And the theory was, I'm speaking for Bill now, but I think he would agree that once you have a level playing field getting to the ballot box, voters, generally speaking, will make the right decision whether they're voting for somebody way down the totem pole or somebody
What do
up
you mean that
higher up.
voters will make the right decision?
Well, if they're armed with information, party organizations aren't the best at. They're in the incumbent protection racket. That's what they do, and that means the biggest threat to incumbents is not an opponent on the other side, in the general election. They don't lose their elections in the general. Most of these guys, once they win a primary or get the
Right.
nomination. So
Particularly
if
in
you
like
can,
Congress
right,
or
and so
local.
yeah, and so the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party, and it's shifted and it changes, but political parties are often engaged in infanticide. They try to strangle anybody that's coming up the chain who's new and different, and appeals direct, which is why these campaigns need to be able to appeal directly to voters, especially in a primary situation. So we've gotten a little bit off track, but that's what Bill saw. Bill invested. He brought in some other investors, and we were off and running. We'd been running the company sort of, in I'll say, in an amateurish way, not having had any formal business education or experience. But we were my brother and I were able to take the business and grow it sufficiently that it attracted investors. And so, I know you've started 20 businesses. It's
And I'm not proud of it.
well, uh, there's each each different phase of a company's
Yes.
growth is different,
Yeah.
different challenges, but also it teaches you different things. So we're over 100 employees. I'm talking about Aristotle now, and we came to predict it because we believed that there was a future for markets. Again, there was an institutional, a legal barrier, that was there, that Predictit's one of Predictit's predecessors, I guess we'll call it, In Trade, had run smack into. Now, they were a gambling site. They were offshore.
Right.
They had
And just to summarize, like there's a lot of hurdles, right? You know, you can argue even the stock market is gambling. Oh, because you
yeah,
own. It's not like you own Apple forever. You just buy Apple stock. Oh, I'm betting it's going to go up for a day. It's
right.
like not based on anything about Apple. It's just based on something else. So it's gambling. So when you gamble on things other than companies, which is what a prediction market is, that really is gambling to some extent. And so that's one hurdle. The other hurdle is, and this is in trade, and even, this is very rare, but it's happened across all the prediction markets. Sometimes an outcome is unclear, and then you have to figure out
Oh,
how
yeah,
it's resolved,
yeah,
because people are betting on it. They have money at stake. They
yep.
want, and if an outcome looks not yes or no, but unclear, people will start arguing and,
Oh,
and
yeah,
suing.
yeah,
So, and then the other issue is, which is a more philosophical one, but the original decision prediction markets dealt with this. You could bet on, for instance, someone to die, and then you have this weird assassination market that
right,
could result. Like you could,
right.
there's incentive now for weird, strange outcomes to happen. People can influence the outcome on some of their bets. So there's no such thing as insider trading, and it's a weird concept.
It
When you
it
get into esoteric predictions.
it is, and though you just mentioned a couple of really interesting sort of angles to this that we've been experimenting with and thinking through. Um, that I was just going to say that the there's been betting on politics for 100 years, right? You could bet on down on Wall Street or Jane Street or someplace down there. You could wager on the outcome of presidential elections, and uh, uh, it wasn't until uh, Intrade and Iowa Electronic Markets came along. Now, Iowa Electronic Markets is interesting because they really were much more the predecessor to predict it. Iowa Electronic Markets, there were some academics at University of Iowa who wanted to see how markets were could be predictive of event contracts. Now, they went to Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa and said, "We would like your help um, getting um, getting a no action letter, meaning relief from the Commodities Future Trading Commission, so that we can open up an events market around principally around politics." And there were certain limits on it, but they got a no
I think you
action
could
letter.
bet up to $500.
Exactly. Good memory. So it's $500 was the maximum you could put into any of these contracts. It functions, you described it well. It functions as the way to think I think about it when I try to describe it to somebody. These are $1 winner take all contracts, the price of which fluctuates based upon what the odds are of an event occurring according to people who are invested in those contracts.
Right, so a couple things there. It's a $1 contract, but you could buy, like, 1,000 contracts,
You
so you
can
could
buy
put $1,000
Now
at
you're
risk.
limited to $850 in any of these contracts. You can reload if the value of your investment goes down, but there's an $850 cap on the amount of money you can invest in these
Is
contracts.
that your cap or is that a legal cap?
That's a CFTC cap that was imposed, but and I was gonna say there was a $500 cap, and the way it got to 850, like, why 850? Why not 875? Is that 850 when Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, which is our partner in this effort, and the academic sponsor, when they went to the CFTC, the discussion was, "We wanna raise this limit because it's an artificial cap. It might reduce liquidity such that you won't have the price discovery that you want from the market." And the settlement
And
was, "We'll just adjust the 500 for inflation." That's how it came to be 850. Now the 850 cap has had some salutary effects in terms of how the prediction market operates, and I can get into that, but it has to do with potential Russian oligarchs, for instance, trying to throw the election. Putting $1,000,000 into a you can't do that in Predict It.
I see. So for instance, because these prediction markets have been more and more known each election, the actual prices that somebody, the price fluctuations are noticed sometimes, not a lot, but I've seen it more and more. Sometimes these are noticed more than the polls even.
Yes.
So if suddenly um I'll take Bernie Sanders' example. If suddenly he spiked up right before Super Tuesday, it might hit the news that, oh my gosh, Bernie
Right,
Sanders has a chance on blah blah blah, and that will affect elections because it's suddenly in the media. It's like
that's right,
free advertising for the Bernie Sanders campaign or whatever campaign. But
right.
so you're saying that there's a cap because big players could influence the
Theoretically, they
news
could influence. Now, what
with not
happened
that
with
much.
yeah, and what happened with Intrade, there's this so-called Romney whale, right? And the Romney whale put at least $1,000,000 into there was no cap, right, with Intrade. Intrade was basically operating, some would say illegally, but offshore with no limits of any kind. And Intrade had some other interesting things. You had to sneak your money over to Ireland. You had to put it into a dodgy bank there, and then you never were sure you were gonna get your money back. All the risks inherent in online offshore gambling. And um, This Romney whale put money in whose identity has been no one's really sure who it was. There's theories as to who it was, but I don't know.
What
But
are the
this
theories?
Well, so it was pretty clearly a supporter of Romney, so you can sort of narrow that down. It was in the closing days of the election. Uh, Now, what happened was the market functioned exactly as the market should function, which is the Romney whale with $1,000,000 bet lost his $1,000,000, and other traders in trade were happy to take his money away from him. And that's basically what happens, as you from your personal experience. If you buy a long shot or you put your money down, if you guessed right, you get a buck back for your investment of 50 cents or 20 cents or whatever it was. If you guess wrong, you lose your money.
Right. So this it's as opposed well. It's so interesting, and we'll maybe talk about strategies towards the end, but, sometimes it pays to put a bunch of, bets on what, again, Nassim Taleb would call black swan events, events
Yes.
that are very unlikely to happen. An example might be, you have an event, that on the prediction market. Who is the next Court justice likely to leave the court?
Right.
And so the winning right now, the market's still happening because no justice has left the court since you started this event. What do you call this market or
It's, we
this?
we call it a market,
Okay,
and
so
in the market there are different contracts. Contract for, each of the Supreme Court
right,
justices
so there's
to
a
be the next. Yeah.
so Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Yep.
is first with like 86 cents.
Right.
So people think so that sort of means people think there's an 86% chance. It doesn't quite
Right.
equate to probabilities, but you could almost think that people think there's an 86% chance
Yeah.
that she'll be the first to leave the court because they're betting she's gonna die.
Right.
And if you bet on that, you bet 86 cents and you have 14 cents upside. If she dies, you get your 14 cents, goes up to a dollar instantly, that contract.
Or she
And
leaves the court for any reason.
yeah, if she doesn't go for any reason, but I think they're betting on
I
realistically, they're
don't
betting
know.
on death.
Yeah.
Or she's so ill that she leaves.
Yeah.
Clarence Thomas is number 2 for some reason at 15 cents. I placed a bet in that market on Stephen Breyer because he's 81 years old.
Mhm.
Was only quote unquote trading at 6 cents. And I figured, okay, there's 93 cents upside, 6 cents downside. Small bet, it's not so bad. And if he even gets a cold, it'll spike up to 12 cents and I'll take the bet off.
Unless 2 Supreme Court justices get a cold,
Right.
in which
But
case.
again, he's the 81-year-old.
Right.
He's this next oldest
Right.
after Ruth Bader
So
Ginsburg.
so so those are that's an interesting, it gets back to your earlier question about, a touchy subject, which is the assassination sort
Right.
of things, and those are illegal, and those are carved out in the no action letter, which the Commodities Future Trading Commission gave, and it's posted at their website. Gave to Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, which, as I said, was the first academic partner. There are now 190 different researchers and others looking at it. So we can talk about that in a little bit. That's interesting in and of itself. Is what are these people studying?
Right. That is very interesting because their argument is, and again, we'll talk about it, is that what's happening, and this is what we were talking about earlier with the Romney whale,
Yeah.
what's happening in the prediction markets, how accurate is that in terms of the actual probability of an event happening?
Right.
And but we'll talk about that in a second. I'm still
Yeah.
curious about the evolution of this.
Sure.
And by the way, I just find this to be so fascinating that you can make money betting on elections, all
Yeah.
these things in this very easy to use interface, whether it's predicted.org or one of these other, I don't even know what other prediction markets are out there. I primarily use
Yeah.
predicted.org, but it's just a fascinating topic.
Right. Predicted is the only one that's authorized with a no action letter from the Commodities Future Trading Commission. But of course, there are offshore gambling sites that, there are dozens of places you can go and gamble. Now, there are other aspects to those sites. And you can bet on sports, for instance, which you can also bet legally in the United States on sports with licensed online gaming operators. And they have limits, and they've got all kinds of things that they have
There's
to
also
comport with.
decentralized where you can make your own event market, which I want
Right.
to get to later as well. That does get related to these death markets, um, but anyway,
So anyway, so the genesis was, we believed that markets have predictive ability. The price of oil, pork bellies, you name it, Tesla cars, all that stuff. Markets have predictive ability because they're highly efficient. The theory is that one of the theories is that they are highly efficient at distilling billions of pieces of information that's floating around out there, rushing into the marketplace of information, and distilling that information, all that data, into uh, uh, prices, meaning odds, and risk. Right. So the chance that the oil prices are going to go up or down, right now you can invest on Wall Street on oil futures,
right,
for
which is
instance.
totally gambling. But
Well, yeah, I mean,
because nobody's buying the oil and storing it in their closet and then selling it later. You don't really, most people don't really think of themselves as owning some oil when they buy oil prices or when they
right,
or owning a piece of, oh, I own some of Apple, computer because I own a 1 share of stock. It's really but again, that's neither here nor there. It's interesting, but one I just wanna kind of every now and then interpret what
Yeah,
you're saying. So there's billions of pieces of information out there in the market, not by any one individual investing in the market, but by all the individuals investing in the market.
that's right.
So if Apple stock was, let's just hypothetically say $100, it's people always argue, "Oh, it's overvalued, it's undervalued," but this is millions of people making decisions that kind of fairly I think in general, as you're kind of pointing out, the prices in the market are pretty much accurate. Like, Apple is usually where it should be in general, not at the fringes, and that's where there's opportunities, and maybe we're even in an opportunity now with coronavirus, but who knows? And, I always ask people, like, sometimes somebody will come up to me, and he's like, "Oh, I think Apple's cheap here." And I always ask them, why do you think you have there's another 7 billion people on the planet.
Mhm.
Now, let's say most of them aren't let's say there's 100 million people who could be active investors. What gives you an advantage over the other 100 million minus 1? You have to have some edge, and that holds for even your prediction markets. So I described the bet I made on Iowa. It's because I called somebody who was on the ground in Iowa
Mhm.
and learned something that wasn't in the news.
Right.
You have to have some reason to think. You have to have a philosophy behind every investment other than just like, "Oh, my gut tells me
Right.
blah blah blah."
Right. Well, that gets a perfect segue into what these what these almost 200 researchers are looking at independent of one another in terms of prediction markets. And we provide, they are trying to understand why markets are so accurate. What makes a super forecaster? That's a perfect area. How does somebody who is more accurate at predicting the outcome of the Iowa caucuses than 10 other people, what are the habits that caused that person to predict Iowa? And do those same habits, is that same person as good at predicting in the New Hampshire primary or the number of coronavirus cases are going to be diagnosed in China next week? That's a really interesting area. What is it about that? Because it's not completely random, right? There's something about their habits or the way they go about this. And here's another question. Is somebody from Iowa better at predicting the outcome of the Iowa caucuses than somebody from New York?
It's interesting you asked that because the biggest mistake I made on Predict It was when I let my emotions get involved. So a lot of times I see people bet on, let's say they bet on Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or Donald Trump because they like that candidate. And that's a bad way to invest because you're not thinking rationally, you're thinking hopefully. Like
Mhm.
everybody who was for Andrew Yang thought Andrew Yang was going to be president, even though the odds were huge against him. And of course, if they had bet, they would have lost. When Bloomberg first announced, I didn't I only knew him as mayor of New York, and he seemed to have done an I didn't really follow him. I didn't really know anything, but I figured, okay, the guy's a billionaire. The person who spends the most amount of money tends to win. I got super excited all of a sudden, and I thought this has got to be a great bet. So I went all in. I bet like a huge bet at 10 cents or something like that, and then he instantly fell to 6 cents, and it took many months before his money started to kick in, and then he went up, and then I cleared out once I was a little up on it. But that was a case where, like, man, I just because I was in New York, I was too influenced by the fact that everyone was excited about him here.
I have heard that so many times, specifically in reference to Bloomberg.
That's funny.
It's yeah. The doormen in the building that I live in are avid predicted traders,
Really.
and it was interesting to see how how they described their reasons for why they
Well,
were going.
because
They
we all
were
know he could buy an election because
well,
he
they were
bought it here.
yeah. But was Bloomberg ever a screaming buy? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people who thought that he was. And again, you may think I think you described this to me a little bit earlier, but you may think Bloomberg is a great buy at 10 cents and a must sell at 25 cents. So you wait till he goes up. You don't have to think he's actually going to get the
Right.
nomination. You can think that other people are going to think he's going to get the nomination, and Bloomberg's going to have good days and bad days, and you're going to get in on a bad day and get out on a good day. You might get back into the Bloombergs on the next bad day. And then that's, of course, has to do with how you assimilate all this information and keep your emotions out of it if you can.
It's so important to keep the emotions out of it
Yeah.
because it's so we all have opinions on these public events that should have nothing to do with how we um bet, or I don't want to use the word bet, how we invest in these
Forecast.
events.
Yeah. It's like, right.
But like with Bloomberg, once I was down and I realized my mistake, I figured, okay, at the very least, there's gonna be an uptick from here because I know he spent 200 and then 400,000,000, and that had not yet kicked in the public imagination. And then there was this 1 week where suddenly he was, "Oh, is Hillary Clinton, did he offer the VP nomination to Hillary Clinton?" And he shot up. I was up, and I just cleared out then. I figured
Right.
that was, and I debated staying in because then the emotions are when you're going up, you kinda
Right.
wanna just
It's
stay in.
confirmation bias,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
But
Every piece of news you get supports the decision you made
right.
in your own head. You say,
But
yeah, I was a genius. Of course,
But I figured it was a mistake in the beginning.
yeah.
So once I was up, so I wasn't betting on Bloomberg. Once I realized I made the mistake, I was no longer betting on Bloomberg to win the nomination, but I was making a bet, a shorter term bet that he would have an uptick and I would get out at a better price. I was happy to get out profitable, but I would have taken any uptick.
Well, the convention hasn't taken place yet. He may still be the
He may
nominee.
still win, but I'm out of the bet.
Well,
So,
you might want to get back in. Who
yeah.
knows? You know,
No, no, I'm not getting
you're
back in.
done. You're done with the
Because
Bloombergs.
look, well, that's a different podcast to argue. We could argue about politics for forever.
Yeah. No, I'm not encouraging one way or another. I think it's fascinating how people, there are biases that people have, or you can say it's sort of internal algorithm as to when you think something's going to happen or not happen. It's not just politics, but politics is fascinating because these are event markets, right? There are all kinds of events. Will Tesla produce, the next million cars by 2025? All those things are events that where the price discovery, meaning being able to roughly affix odds, is enormously valuable. And pundits and others and polls certainly are polls are good for certain things in a political campaign. I've managed campaigns before here and in other countries.
Really?
And yeah, and polling is invaluable for certain things. If you want to understand, because polling asks you, the respondent to this poll, what do you want to have happen? Right? Are you going to vote for so and so, or are you going to vote for such and such? That's the fundamental thing that a poll does. And then it goes further. A pollster, the really good ones, can say, why do you think that? What is it about it? Is it healthcare for all? Whatever it is. And so you can understand, get deep into what people want to have happen at this moment in time, and then why they feel that way. That's not a very good way of predicting what's going to happen 6 months from now. It's a terrible way to predict what's going to happen 6 months from now. And markets are much better at anticipating what the accurate price should be, meaning roughly the odds, as you say, for a particular event occurring or not occurring way down the road.
But let me ask you about that, because look at this Democratic nomination. I would say throughout almost all of it, Biden was number 1 in the polls nationally. Not on It was weird because there was a period where he wasn't number 1 in any state, but he was number 1 just a national, who do you wanna be if you're Democrat, who do you wanna be president? Biden was, like, number 1. And that poll, and he wasn't number 1. I forget where he was on the standings in Predicted, but
No, the guy was at death's door. I mean,
yeah.
in some of these
I feel
places,
like the
right?
polls were more accurate than predicted in this case on Biden, the
Well,
national polls.
again, we'll have to see what happens when we get
Yeah.
to the convention, but it could very well be, that it's even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. And the fact of the matter is, the polling is. I mean, pollsters will tell you that polling this far in advance of an event or an election is really it's useful because it gives reporters something to talk about, and you flog the poll. You sometimes try to create the poll to show that you've got momentum, or the donor should give you more money. We use polls all the time in foreign campaigns, to show the power structure, the change is coming, that people are going to go in this direction. But the reality is, taking a picture of something that's going to happen, a poll is a snapshot at this moment in time, and it really doesn't. It's to your point earlier. when you have skin in the game, it clears your head. And I don't care if it's $1,000 or it's $10. You put even the smallest bit of money, smallest wager down on an event occurring or not occurring, you suddenly pay a lot of attention. You're
It
laser focused on that
it's so
event
fascinating
occurring. It is. It's that's one of the things these guys are studying right now is
because
why is that?
in the stock market, my bets, if you call them that, are often much greater than like the $300 I might have put on Bloomberg or on Brexit. Brexit was my very first investment on Predicted. And again, I didn't know anything about Brexit, and I knew the news articles were useless. So I was suddenly, though, my brain changed. Like, I didn't want to just have an opinion. I started reading all these obscure laws out of Theresa May's
Yeah.
administration and then Boris Johnson's. And then I read all of the original EU rules when Brexit was voted on years ago. And so I became like obsessed about Brexit. I didn't read a single news article except maybe some headlines just to see what was going on day by day. But you really figure out how to become an expert very quickly. And I only had like a few $100s on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the research on sports betting is interesting too because it supports that. If you have a little bit of money down on the football game, you are something like 11 times more likely to watch the game,
Hmm.
right? So the fact of the matter is, and that's what drives ESPN and a lot of these sports statistics, right? Is somebody who is we call them traders, you can also call them betters, but somebody who's got some skin in the game, it becomes a voracious consumer of information about what the odds are and what the likelihood is. And then they also start to discuss, in some of these markets that we have in the comments section. I don't know if you've
Yes.
looked, it's fascinating. It's really interesting. A lot of it's garbage, right? But a lot of it's people like putting out theories, trying to influence the decision of other traders. We have a million comments in some of these markets.
Yeah, and they're
And
a lot more sophisticated than, let's say there was a YouTube video about Biden versus Sanders. Those comments are idiotic, and everybody's just talking their opinion.
right,
These people are in the comment section on Predicted. They're trying to make money,
right.
or they have skin in the game.
That's exactly
Even if
right.
they're only trying to make $10, they're like they put money down. They made a bet.
And they explain their rationale as to why they think this is,
Yeah.
this is worth, not that it's going to happen, that this 10-cent bet is worth 20 cents. The odds should be 20%. I mean, it's the other effect that's really interesting is we call it, the Uncle Festa Thanksgiving conversation. So, everybody has an uncle who sits at the end of the table during Thanksgiving and starts to opine on politics and all this business. And it often devolves into an argument, a shouting match between two sides of the table. But with Predict It, you can actually have a rational conversation with Uncle Festa about whether, okay, I mean, but should the odds be 51% of what you're saying? Or is it more like, what do you say? Would you take 51 cents on that bet for the chance to win a dollar? And, he can come back and say, no, I'd take it at 40 or 30 or 50
Well,
or 60.
see, that's interesting because then it's not quite like a stock. It's more like the options markets, right? So options markets, the prices of options, and we don't have to get into what options are, but Nobel Prize winners have created ways to value different options, and it's based on when is the time of the event, when what is the volatility of the event. So I think these contracts are probably priced more like options contracts.
They
Like
are.
there's a vega and a gamma, all these things that are used to
Yep.
value options. And again, I don't want to get into the weeds of that. So it's but options deal a lot more with probabilities of a certain event happening by a certain time as opposed to stocks.
Right. And you were mentioning about the resolution authority. Like, so what happens when, a the outcome is ambiguous. For this to work, you've got to have binary outcomes, right? So
Right.
everybody can point to it and say, this occurred or this didn't occur. And this is the authority, the resolution authority on whether it occurred or didn't occur. And so in the 4.5 years that we've been helping to operate, Predict It, we have found some things make really good questions and some things don't make good
Well,
markets.
why do you have a market for how many times Donald Trump will tweet this year?
Because it's hugely popular. People like, I mean, first of all, before Trump, tweeting was not considered a way to communicate with anybody except maybe your girlfriend. So, but the fact of the matter is, or your audience out
Yeah.
there, um, but the fact of the matter is the uh, this administration's tweets, and even some of these candidates now that are tweeting, this is where policy gets made.
Hmm.
It's not irrelevant whether Trump is. I mean, Matt, remember when he first came in, he would mention the name of a company. I don't know, it was Caterpillar or somebody else, and the price of the stock would go up or down based on whether they were included in the tweet that the
But
president
what's
sent out.
interesting about the number of tweets? Like, why is that? I mean, I could see just in terms of like, let's say I haven't bet on that market, but let's say I were to bet on it, I guess I would see in the past 3 years how many times has he tweeted per day? What's the rough volatility of this? Does he take a break? Does he take a break during bad times, during good times? Does he tweet more when his polling's low? So I would start to analyze the
Right.
data as opposed to making a guess. That's what the skin in the
That's
game is.
that's right.
But why would I be interested in
And the
that?
number?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly why. I'm not allowed to bet on Predicted, so let's
Mm.
start right there. But I don't know exactly what motivates people to forecast number of tweets this week or next. I suspect they're trying to get into the president's head in terms of, when there's a tweet storm, something's going on up there, and people think, that is indicative of some future action.
Hmm.
But I don't, I can't tell you why people often will forecast around events that they have no personal interest in whatsoever. Maybe tweets is an example of that. Number of tweets is an example of that. But they there's a theory that you're better off forecasting, betting in areas where you don't have any emotional attachment whatsoever to. And it's easy to say, it's hard to do, is to remove your emotions from your forecasting. But that may be one of those pure play. Maybe the rationale for the tweet markets is nobody really, so what?
Well, I guess the interesting thing is that that feels a little bit more of a random market than the election. So the election, there's
Right.
huge amounts of data about who's going to win this election. Now you could be wrong still, you could be right still, but millions of people have thought about this. Tweets feel how number of tweets feel somewhat random. So
Yeah.
I'm curious if that's more or less if you've found or if predicted has found that is more or less predictable than other events. Are there events that are more random than others?
There certainly are. I don't know what they are, and
Mhm.
that's what some one of the things, for instance, that some of these researchers are studying. When I say researchers, I'm talking about these are the economics department or the mathematics or the marketing school or school of business, for instance, or the political science department. They will have professors that the number of researchers is around 185, 190. The number of educational institutions they're affiliated with is about 90 right now, but it includes things like West Point. At West Point, they use Predicted as part of as a teaching
Oh,
instructional
that's great.
tool.
That
Uh,
is that is genius, by the way. Every course
you know what I
should
mean?
use it
Yeah. So, and then the
because
Federal
then you
Reserve.
learn.
Federal Reserve gets the anonymized data, from Predicted, and what they're using it for, I don't
Wait,
know.
so what data do you give the Federal Reserve?
Well, we give them the overall trading. We don't give them the individual trader level data, and we definitely and also don't give the names of the traders out. But we show it's mostly price, so it's bid, ask, volume, price that we provide, and so some people are studying the tweets market, some people are studying all the markets, some people are doing look backs on Brexit. Look, the golden the uh, the thing people are trying to discover, more or less, is what makes a super forecaster. Can you teach those skills or habits? And then the other piece of it is, in defining a super forecast, you don't need to pick Brexit 6 months from now ahead of the event in order to make a killing in the stock market. I'm not talking about in Predict It. You can make good bank and Predict It, but where this really is important is a currency trader or somebody who's going to who and you don't have that currency trader doesn't need to know 6 months in advance what's going to happen. If he knows 6 minutes in advance that something's going to happen, that is coin of the realm. That is hugely valuable.
So you look for I mean, there's so many things you could study. You could look at short-term volatility on predicted, if it's correlated
Is it
for any
a
market or
leading
to
indicator? Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
are they correlated to markets where you can make an enormous amount of money?
Well, I mean, anything to do with anticipating the future. Because look, it's not. it gets to your accuracy question. A predicted trader doesn't have to be more accurate 100% of the time. He just needs to be more accurate 5% of the time. And he only needs to be more accurate 5% of the time in a market other than predicted, but where there's a liquid market out there that is going to swing dramatically based upon this outcome that this predicted forecaster is able to
Well,
foresee 5% more better than anybody else.
see, I think that's really interesting is that you could actually make a lot of money and be wrong most of the time. What you're really trying to find, you it's so interesting because 'cause you're not really trying to make accurate predictions. That's a small part of being successful at predicted from my limited experience. You can correct me if I'm wrong. What you need to be really good at is understanding when predicted is under or overestimating
Yes.
someone's chances.
Yes.
So if I happen to know, let's say Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer is sick and nobody else knows it, then he probably shouldn't have 20 to 1 odds of being the first Supreme Court justice to leave the court. Maybe he should have more like 10 to 1 odds. And so I'm really making that bet without, again, making a bet on who's going to be the first to leave. I'm just making a bet that the odds should be different.
Well, that's and you think about it. Think about a lot of the um, investment decisions that are made on Wall Street. They're run by computers or looking at patterns. It's not whether the next Tesla is going to be a particularly good or a bad car. It has more to do with what happens after after some kind of a shock to the system like we're having right now. And so all those, you know, the human we don't really understand very well why the human mind acts the way it does. And it's a combination of emotion and intellect and data and right time and luck, whatever that means. Uh, but we're not in the business of foretelling of creating a machine that foretells the future 100% of the time. What we're looking for is a way to more accurately gauge odds and then the next person sitting next to you or across the country. And so if you think about the magnitude of what the implications of this are, so what gets me out of bed in the morning, we're trying to pull the curtain back just a little bit in terms of telling the future, just a little bit. And we don't need 2020 vision. We just need to be able to sort of make out some shadows and some outlines. And if we can just do that, you've really advanced, human knowledge a great deal. And you've also created something that's hugely valuable for society.
So what research has been interesting to you in terms of the research done on this? Like, are are there super forecasters out there? What habits do they have? And I guess the other question is, what again, how predictive is predicted? Like, you know, take a market that's not very volatile. So, and again, I keep going back to this
Yeah,
Supreme Court justice
right.
one, but pretty much the entire time I've been invested in it, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's been at 86 cents. Maybe she was at 80 cents and as she gets older, it gets a little higher. But uh maybe that market will be correct. There's a random component too, but it seems like a very low volatile market is probably more accurate than a high volatile
I
market.
don't know if that's the case. It's a really good question. I've never looked at that. I know that when there are so with the Supreme to your point about Supreme Court, when Kavanaugh was selected for the Supreme Court, I don't know if you saw this data, but one of the um, groups that was researching this, you could see information leaking into the market that Kavanaugh was going to be the pick, Trump's pick, and you can see it happening before the news stories broke. And all what that means is people with some inside information or people with superior knowledge in some way were uh, were
Yeah.
acting on that.
Well,
And
that's
that's
very interesting
fascinating to
too.
look because inside information it's not quite inside information because of the context here, but superior information, markets attract superior information. I don't care if you're talking about Wall Street or you're talking about Main Street. There is a natural tendency for information to flow into these markets at light speed. And you can start to see it with something like a Supreme Court nomination. Where it came from, we don't know. How it got there, we don't know. All we know is the market started to tick up on Kavanaugh's long before it was reported. It was announced that he was the pick. And it kind of makes sense, right? You assume You called your friends in Iowa to ask them
Yeah.
about the ground game, I think you may have told me, or the quality of the campaign, that sort of thing. That's not necessarily public information. It's not super secret. It's not classified, but by the same token, you did what smart traders did, and as a result, you made some money on Mayor Pete.
Right, and you're it's a very interesting point you're making because there's no such thing as inside information on a prediction market, that, like you said, that information gets baked into the market as soon as some investigator is researching for Trump, Kavanaugh, that investigator's kid even might and his friends might invest on Kavanaugh on predict it, and it's
Right.
legal. Um, and it's kind of an argument to make insider trading legal on the stock market because information is baked there anyway, but if a market is prevented from having all the information in its pricing, it's not really an accurate market. And so withholding inside information from the market actually makes a market less accurate and less potentially less good for the public. But so the public has two needs. One is don't let people make money unfairly, and that's the basis of the laws around insider trading. But the other role of a market is to be accurate as possible. And so that
You've
goes,
got that tension there. There's no
yeah,
doubt about it. But just to clarify, I mean, there are very strict laws against using information that is non-public, whether you're trying to make a profit by with predicted or you're trying to make a profit on the New York Stock Exchange. If you are, if you're violating the law regarding using non-public information, if you're a congressional aide, for instance, and you know a piece of legislation, it's confidential. You use certain piece of information to try to make money in the stock market. The point
in the
being,
stock market, yes, but in
well, no,
predict it.
I think the law has to do with your responsibility to to maintain confidentiality and the like. So you can't. But I
I
was going
see.
to get to there are laws against insider trading that apply to you whether you're transacting on the street corner with some type of information or you're in the stock market wherever you are. The, this is where the limit gets interesting again. Just as it deters a Russian oligarch from coming in and the limit's $850. The fact that there's a limit in terms of what you can possibly invest in any of these contracts really deters people from taking a huge risk with breaking an insider trading law. You don't have those same circuit breakers and those same restrictions in terms of the, Wall Street. There's no, you can make millions and millions of dollars. You can make a little bit of money.
What's the most you've seen someone make on predict it?
Oh, I think people that make, 10 to 1 is not unheard of. Look, 10 to 1 odds. You buy something at 10 to 1 odds or even 100 to 1 odds. That means every 100th time that thing is supposed to happen, right? So the fact of the matter is, and we all have this, what we talked about earlier, we all have this long shot bias. We all have, you think youth, the human mind somehow we think we see with greater clarity what's likely to happen, whether it's the Iowa caucus
Right.
or the Supreme Court decision. And we have this it's called long shot bias. And we have this long shot bias because you think, I know it's not that likely, but if I get this one right, I'm going to get 10 to 1 on my investment. I'm going to turn $850 into $8,500. And that starts to cloud your judgment. Your long shot bias starts to cloud your judgment. The question is not, yes, okay, bravo, you figured out if you get 10 to 1 right, you make 8,500 bucks. The question is 10 to 1 the right pricing for this kind of for this kind of outcome?
Right, and so that's where doing research on publicly
Yeah.
available data, but seldom looked at data, uh, can tell you where this might different markets might be mispriced. And again,
Yeah.
you can make the most amount of money if you kind of if you invest in 10 markets where it's all long shots, but you've done just a little bit of research to have a 1% edge over what you think is the edge everyone else has, you're gonna make an enormous amount of money if just any of those
That's right.
long shots play off. But, particularly some of them have different time spans than others, so you can reinvest and so on. But, okay, so what are the qualities of a super forecaster? Have you guys figured it out?
Well, I don't think we figured it out, and I think that that's why this all these people that's why this research is it's gonna be so interesting, and what's been done so far is really, uh, you know, just laying the, every time it's sort of like the advance of human knowledge. Every time you think you have an answer, the best answers lead to more questions and you
Well,
start to go in. But there's certain habits. I mean, luck has very little to do with it.
it's like poker. Like any one game of poker or even backgammon could be won by luck
That's a very
by
good
anybody,
analogy.
but it tends to be there's always that saying in the World Series of Poker, it tends to be the same 8 people in the final 8.
Mhm.
And luck kind of goes away after a while.
It's a skill. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
poker is
def
definitely a skill game. Backgammon is a skill game, even though there's dice, even though
yeah.
there's cards. But okay, so you've seen though, you have leaderboards. You know who the top predictor is. I don't know if you've called them and say, "Hey, what do you do?" But like, what are some habits you've seen at least, even if it's not researched fully?
I mean, so I'll give you an example. The One of the habits that these successful traders employ is that yes, they research and research and research. They look into, try to collect more information. They consume information, as we talked about. Same with you if you're betting on a sporting team,
And
for
how do they
instance.
consume information? Because it can't be from news articles, because those are what everybody reads.
No, they go, for instance, they'll try to understand what the exit polls are showing, right? They'll try to get some kind of connection to somebody who's doing exit polls. I mean, on Brexit, there were hedge funds that hired people to do exit polling in the UK. I'm talking about the original Brexit,
Right,
to be able to get results of and extrapolate from that what was were the Brits gonna vote leave.
right.
Uh, that's an example of an extreme step that people might take, where there are hundreds of billions of dollars at stake. So they do research. They spot things like a their own long shot bias, and try to negate the influence as best they can. And what that, as a practical matter, means is if you're coming into a market well in advance of the binary outcome that's going to take place, you don't really need to know. You don't need to know if Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee or not. All you need to know, if you can discern this, is Bernie Sanders going to have a good day. And then when he does, because he probably will have a good day. He'll probably have a couple more good days between now and
Well, by the way,
November elections.
in the market for who's going to be the Democratic nominee, he doesn't he doesn't rank. I mean, Joe Biden's like at
Right, comes in third.
86 cents also, and Hillary Clinton
He's
is
ahead of
at
him.
15 cents or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. She's like, I think. Yeah, I didn't know she was that high. I know she's been. And so you think about the psychology of the people that are buying Hillary's, right? Now, bear in mind, they might also be buying Biden's.
Right, that's the other factor is that it's not voting, it's just like I placed 2 bets on Iowa, you kinda hedge yourself in
Yeah,
different ways.
you can't do
Particularly
that
if you
with a
if you
poll,
think the
right?
odds are mispriced, there's ways to figure out how to hedge.
Well, exactly, and that's where my point is. That's exactly where some of these super forecasters are operating, in that realm where you're saying, I am uh, a combination of what the odds are, what the payback's going to be if I get this right, or at least if I don't get it wrong, and what the chances are that this stock price that I'm buying this at is going to go up between now and next week. And then having some discipline in there is to saying, I'm going to sell these babies if once I've doubled my money. I'm not going to try to get 10 to 1. I'm going to try to get 2 to 1.
Right, so I guess someone betting on Hillary, again, she's at 15 cents, so it's not like there's a lot of people who think, "Oh my gosh, she's definitely gonna be the nominee." They probably think she's not gonna be the nominee, but she's gonna have an uptick. Maybe they think he's gonna have a big enough, kind of gaffe while speaking, he makes these
Well,
missteps while speaking that the rumors will start, and then they could sell her at 20 cents before she drops back down to 10 cents.
yeah, I'll put it another way. So one may think that the odds that Biden is going to be the nominee, are correctly priced at 80 cents or 85 cents right now. How is that? The convention is months away, 120 days away. How is that conviction that Biden's going to be the nominee? How does that square with? Is that really that important if you're buying Biden's? What are the chances that Biden is going to commit a gaffe at the debate next week? And what are the odds? Okay, we all know how these candidates perform, and I think there's some possibility that there's going to be some moment at the debate, which will cause the prices to fluctuate. I just put it that way. And if that's the case, you can go to bed tonight if you are betting that the price is going to drop a little bit or Bernie's price is going to go up a little bit. You can go to bed tonight. If you think there's something is going to happen at the debate, then you can expect there's going to be, to your point, volatility. There's going to be a change in pricing, and then once that happens, if that happens, uh, then you got to know when to get out, and you probably want to get out fast if and when the price goes up. So the point being, and 4 months is a lifetime in politics. It's we have we're in the middle of one crisis. There's other crises happening. Who knows what's going to happen 4 months from now in terms of? And I would say I think probably those that pricing on Hillary's is it, all that's important is the price going to go up or down between now and
And
the
I guess a bet on
convention.
Hillary is you're sort of betting roughly on a brokered convention that he's gonna make a big enough mistake that either removes him or people are gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, we can't have him be the nominee. Who else do we have? How about the person who got the most popular votes of all time? Let's get her again," even though she lost. But, uh, uh, it's so interesting because I guess let's say someone was doing this professionally, and so it's much more than skin in the game. It's like a professional outcome. It's sort of like you wanna look at almost 3 things. A, what extra information can I get that is not normally available? I don't wanna say publicly available, but not normally available. So, for instance, knowing how many people Pete Buttigieg has working for him in Iowa. Then so that helps you assess the odds from an information perspective. Then it seems if you're looking at these contracts like options contracts, and again, there are kind of standard for 40 years, standard mathematical formulas for how you value these, you could see it would be interesting to see, do these really match how they have to match to some extent how option contracts are valued, just because there's time decay, there's a volatility factor. So you could factor that in and you could see what's mispriced if these
Mhm.
were options. And then the third thing I would probably want to do is get all the data and run it through a computer. So if Biden, for instance, goes down 5 days in a row, let's say he goes from 86 to 85 to 84 to 83 to 82 cents to win the nomination, what usually happens on the sixth day of any issue going down 1 cent 5 days in a row from those high levels?
Right.
Because it's not like he's plummeting. It's just that people are slowly selling him. So there's not any factor that changed the big probabilities. It's just some weird trading is happening.
It may be a complete algo, you know?
Yeah. So you can figure out odds though that way, at least a normal curve around all these different markets and bet accordingly, unless there's information that says, "Oh no, he died, so you can't bet on him."
Right.
So stuff like that.
Well, so yeah, so looking at it from all these different angles is why this thing is so interesting. I don't have the answer to the question as to what makes a super forecast, right? We see habits, and we're going to figure this out, but it
But
might take us a long
have
time
you
to do.
talked to one of the best? Like, who are some of the best traders? What do they tend to do?
Yeah, we in fact one of the most interesting things we do. It's not just the best traders; it's all traders. Is we do these what we call, you'll get a kick out of this, these trader appreciation nights, and usually it's a debate or it's a election night or something like that. And we'll sequester a bar somewhere. Usually, it's a political bar in state capital somewhere in Washington D.C.
Oh
Sometimes.
man, I want to go to one of
I
these.
know there's so much fun. Well, that's what I was going to say. This is the this is our own back of the envelope trader research. But you get a couple hundred of these people in the room. You buy 'em a bunch of drinks, and they turn it into a trading floor. It's the most interesting transformation, and uh, people want to be there because you can sort of look in, sort of get a peek into the psyche of these people who are, some of them have quit their day jobs and all they're doing is they're forecasting unpredicted, most daytime hours of the day and sometimes long into the night. And they communicate with each other. And of course, their communications with each other, we're not privy to. We don't know what they're
Do the
doing.
markets change a lot after these trader appreciation nights?
So they don't. That's a really good question, actually. I don't know if we've ever looked at. at trading patterns of people who come to the parties or, don't come to the parties, or it has no I don't know. It's a really
I
interesting question.
I feel like I was getting close to hitting the leaderboards a few months
Oh,
ago,
yeah?
but then, because I was betting that Trump would eventually get over 50 cents in terms of the
Yeah.
popular vote, and he's fallen in this coronavirus. Now I'm still up, like I said before, but I'm not a leader.
Yeah, yeah. So I was gonna say, it's not just we invite, everybody in the zip codes wherever we do these parties. They
You should have
respect
you
it.
should have one. I own the comedy club across the street. Fits 120 people, and there's a bar. You
That's a
gotta have one there.
and we got some comedy guys. There's a Barstool Sports has a 4 comedians that now, talk about Predict It, and they're looking for venues like that where they can
Oh
do
my
this sort of
god,
thing.
and
Well,
we
yeah,
know Barstool Sports very
yeah.
tell them the
I
club's open for them.
I will, I will. These guys are hysterical, and they're bipartisan offenders. Like, they don't have a political axe to grind. They just go in there, and they
Well, that's just it. You can't vote your opinion. You can't bet on your opinion.
no, and no,
Opinion has nothing to do with it.
and also another thing that's interesting, I know, we think there's an argument to be made that predicted is a the antidote to fake news. If you consume fake news and you make a bet based upon fake news, you're going to lose your money, right? So there is a it's a bullshit detector. And so when you start to think, am I going to put my money down based on this outrageous rumor that just came over the wires, or that one of the candidates or another's putting out, I want to think very carefully before I do that.
Yeah, like I again, news articles are just as bad here as they are in the stock market because by the time, there's a saying, by the time it's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, you're too late.
Right.
So it's the same thing here. You have to kind of have alternative ways of getting your news, and then add in the fact that there's so much of this fake news or polarized news or whatever you want to call it, that's in the news now. You can't use that to make your bets, other than to see how things are turning out, like very
Yeah.
superficial analysis. How's this bet looking?
Right. So buy on the rumor, sell on the news, right? So
Yeah,
that's
or just to see the outcome, like, oh, who won the primary? Oh,
right.
that's a headline. That's not fake news. I won that bet or I lost that bet.
Okay, so let's talk about what's bottom fishing in this market right now. Is there any bottom fishing you would consider doing, to use a Wall Street term?
I was looking at it. It was kind of when the Democratic nomination sort of settled down, there wasn't as much. The only bet I regret not making was for a while Stacey Abrams was leading for who was going to be the likely vice presidential nominee,
Right.
and she was leading by a huge margin, and that was I thought at the time it was very unlikely, and I don't know why I didn't buy the no. You can buy the yes or the no
Yes.
contract, and so Stacey Abrams, just to summarize, everybody thought Bernie Sanders was going to win the nomination. She was an employee of Bernie Sanders' campaign, and she's an African American woman, so it fit certain demographics that people were betting would be important for the vice presidential nominee if Bernie Sanders got the presidential nomination. But I felt like that was too much of a bet on Sanders getting the nomination, and it was unlikely that he would pick someone so closely aligned that she was that person would be an employee. So I I think bottom fishing would be looking for things like that either the odds are hugely for and you're willing to bet no, or the odds are hugely against and you're willing to bet yes, and you feel it's mispriced. So, but in all your current markets right now, I don't know. I don't really have that many bets on actually right
You
now.
think things are rationally priced right
In
now?
a weird way, yeah, even though the world is and coronavirus is an interesting, has an interesting impact in that there's no other news right now. There's no other information
Right.
going into society, so everything's sort of frozen. There's literally nothing else in the news,
Right.
and, so what would you bet on? Like, you can't bet on something that's a little more random, like Trump's tweets. You can't you could use actuarial tables to bet on which Supreme Court justice is going to leave first. Uh, there's some bets on the economy you can make. I'm not as familiar with a lot of the foreign markets, even though I did bet on the Brexit stuff. So I don't know where I would bottom fish at the moment. I feel like most of the time things are rational, and you just have to wait for those moments where they're irrational. Why don't you have a coronavirus market?
Well, we're actually going to be putting up some. Um,
Because that will have some interesting, what would you call it? Like interesting value inside the bet, inside
Oh,
the
yeah,
market.
no, there's definite price discovery on, how many cases are gonna be diagnosed, for instance,
But
or
like Biden, there's no interesting discovery because it's like he's already kind of got a lock on the nomination. So you're sort of betting that something bad's going to happen to him, or he's going to create a gaffe so bad, unlike his other 50,000 gaffes. This one would be so bad that it will deter people from voting for him at some point.
yeah, I'm not predicting that one way or another, I'm just saying
Right,
from
right. But I'm
experience.
saying that's why
It
with
doesn't seem that's quite so far-fetched though, does it? When you start thinking about it in the context, if we've got 120 days to the convention, you got another, 3, 4 months after that to the general election, what are the odds there's not gonna be a banana peel?
well,
And
that's why he's not at 95 cents at this point. I bet you the
well,
similar,
there you go, right.
context in another election, somebody who won Super Tuesday and all the earlier primaries or whatever, someone who's leading delegates at this point would probably have a 92, 93 cent chance. There's only death really would prevent him from, or a scandal would prevent him from winning. But, people are betting on these gaffes, but the flip side of it, he's already made 1,000 gaffes, and that didn't deter people from voting for him. So it's hard to make it's probably reasonably priced is what I'm saying.
Right, but I would go back to the earlier comment. So I don't I mean, I don't think anybody's got a lock, to use that expression. I and I'm including the incumbent president. I don't think anybody's got a lock. Who would have thought that, this pandemic, and the sort of White House handling of this, who would have predicted that?
Yeah.
3 months ago.
But I
I mean,
think
this is
that's
just 3 months ago or even 2 months ago, and and so I think the situation is a lot more fluid than people think, and I would look for those that other people think is a lock, and I mean, if I could bet and predict it, I would probably go, again, but there you go with the long shot bias, but I would say anything that seems like anything where confidence is gonna be shaken by a development completely out of the control of the protagonist is relevant. There's a saying we have in presidential campaigns, which is there are four things that, generally speaking, affect determine whether you're going to win a presidential your side's going to win a presidential election, and you have no control over three of the four things. The first thing you don't have any control over is who your opponent's going to be, right? No control. The second thing you don't have any control over is the condition of the economy. Sound familiar? There's no control on the condition of the economy. I don't care what somebody says about the incumbent steering the economy, or the incumbent thinks he gets credit for the economy. He has no control over the economy. The third thing you have no control over is the October surprise. You don't know
right.
what Putin's going to do. We don't know what the Iranians are going to do. What the dictator in North Korea is going to do. We
And
have no
also just
idea.
also just randomly, whatever the narrative in the media is, you don't know what's gonna be the narrative.
You don't have
Like,
any.
th
You have any idea, any control over that.
think about 1976. uh, Carter was ahead of Gerald Ford in the polls, and then the October surprise was a Playboy interview came out where he said he occasionally had lust in
Lusted in
his
his
eyes.
heart.
Yeah, yeah, lust in his heart. Yeah, for other women,
Right.
and that almost took the election from him.
Right.
So,
Right.
but to your point though, that's why Biden's not at 100 cents. He's at 86 cents, 85 cents. Who knows? You'd have to study prior elections where the winning candidate was at this time, and then decide to see where those were priced. Is Biden priced? If Biden was priced exactly the same as Obama was at this time in 2008, that might be maybe Biden's mispriced because Obama was probably more of a lock.
Right.
And so you'd have to kind of study that data, and I don't even know if there's enough data
Oh,
to
I don't
really
think
study.
Obama was anything close to a lock at this point.
Yeah,
I
so
don't.
you'd have to look at some election where somebody was a lock and just compare to
Right.
where Biden, if was Biden similar or what's the differences? Okay, he can make one of these gaffes. Is that priced in already to the
Right.
market? So it's hard to just bet that it'll happen without understanding if it's mispriced, is my guess.
Right. So you look for what you consider to be price discrepancies. That's what we're coming to,
Yeah,
right? You look for things where you think the market is overestimating or underestimating the likelihood something's going to happen. And not that it's going to happen in the long run, but that events are going to intrude, and they're going to cause people to bid up or bid down something that previously appeared to be more than likely to happen. And I think we got plenty of I mean, there's no shortage of opportunities
yeah.
for people to be forecasting in this market currently.
Well, this is the interesting thing is that when you say these conjures are between 0 and 100, which make them look like they're odds. And when you say something has odds, that implies, and I'm not going to get too much into the weeds, but that implies some sort of bell curve or normal curve distribution on the probabilities of these events. But there's not a normal curve distribution because it's more like an earthquake distribution. You can't ever say, "Oh, the odds of an earthquake are 5% today." There's no such thing. It's
Right.
just an earthquake is always a 1 in a million event, and yet will happen more than 1 in a million times.
Right.
You're looking for situations where uh, the tail of the curve has a different shape than a normal curve.
It's true.
And you'd have to identify those markets where that could happen.
But if you can spot those in advance, all of a sudden you've got that in itself is a hugely valuable data point.
Right. Insurance
Because you're
companies,
just like exactly.
insurance companies take markets. Insurance companies are prediction markets, right? So insurance companies look at all the odds of someone with my characteristics, 52 years old, male, certain education, certain health history, and they have thousands of examples of people exactly like me, and they determine the odds I'm going to die. And and then they price their life insurance accordingly. Now, they may be wrong on me or they may be right on me, but over the long run with people, they'll probably be right because there's a luck factor with each
Mhm.
thing. Here, you don't have thousands of bets you're making. You're making just one bet on Joe Biden, say. And so the luck factor you have to take into account in a different way.
Right, but we have the benefit of having, we've had a over 1 billion shares transacted.
Yeah, and 29,000
One
traders, so there's a lot of information
right.
baked into the market. So you can view it as very reliable in an actuarial sense, but you're still gonna have that
You're
kind
gonna
of
have right.
earthquake moment.
Well, you know what? I mean, that's what to your point, I mean, you have, hurricane landfall options that insurance companies insure against. Is
Yeah.
it gonna be in the Gulf or is it gonna be on the Panhandle? And those are the same, I guess, but
Yeah, no, you're right. When they do catastrophic insurance, those are similar. You have to price those similarly
But
to
they're not
yours.
just pulling it out of the air, right? They're looking at similar catastrophes. What
Right.
was the cost of those catastrophes? How do we reinsure against the most likely or the most expensive and most likely events occurring? So it's 5 minutes more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I just people call me all day long. Um,
it's another 5 minutes. You think?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, yeah. I'm enjoying this
I mean
immensely.
I mean, there's honestly 6,000 more questions,
Right.
but I really well, first off, I don't even know where to begin. I have so many questions.
Go ahead.
Well, okay, let's talk more about the forecasters. What do you think are, other than keeping emotions out of it, having an obsessive interest in finding unusual information advantages, what are some other habits? Do you see the most successful traders making bets on long shots or making, there's one strategy which is just to always bet on the sure thing, and that's going to work until it doesn't.
Right. Well, I tell you, I mean, let me tell you what we found is not what conventional wisdom where it might be wrong in terms of assuming who these super forecasters are. The we have we have very popular zip codes, Wall Street being one of them, K Street another. But but by and large, the traders are not political junkies. It's interesting to me. That's fascinating. I always thought that the people would be trading in and out of predicted would be people who are, they're working on a campaign or they're reporters, for instance, or they're covering the elections for some other reason, or they're, government affairs people. We have a lot of those people, but by and large, it's not political junkies. Another interesting thing is w- the split of registered Democrats versus Republicans versus unaffiliated voters almost exactly mirrors what the party registration is in the United States. So there isn't a whole bunch of people who are Democrats or Republicans that are so that's another thing that's interesting. Now, what we don't yet know is, well, let's take a look at the people the kinds of people that are buying that are correct on long shots or not correct on long shots. That's where a lot of this research is going on. We have some, working theories, obviously. We've been fascinated by, what makes for a super forecaster, but we don't really have the definitive information. Age group, for
But
instance. Most, there's an age skew, there's a gender skew, all that stuff
even
in
for the
terms.
most successful predictors, it's all across the board demographically.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so
So far,
l-
so far. I
let me
mean,
ask this related to that is if predicted is largely successful at being a predictor of events, wouldn't it be the case that the most successful forecasters simply bet all the time on the higher price contracts. The higher price contracts are all the events that are likely to happen. So if predicted is truly predictive, wouldn't a high price contract like, something trading 70 cents, 80 cents, wouldn't that just go higher and higher as we get closer to the event date?
If it unless new information intercedes
And how
intervenes.
often does that happen? How often does basically predict it have somebody who's 70 cents or has an event that's 70 cents for a long period of time
Right.
and then lose?
So that's a really good question. So there's something called a Breyer score, and there's a bunch of different ways to calculate this. We throw out a number, and I'm not going to try to defend it, but we throw out a number of 75 to 80% accuracy, which means that the market is saying something is more likely to happen than not, and that thing happens. What's really important is because that doesn't really matter, right?
Right.
It's useful. It does answer the question, but what really matters is how often is the market and how far off from the event is it accurate, which is where the Breyer score comes in. In other words, if I can pick something that's going to happen 6 months before, it's what we talked about before, 6 months before it happens with better than 50% acuity, that that's interesting because look, I mean, Elizabeth Warren was the runaway front runner 6 months ago, 7 months ago,
Yeah.
right? And then it was Bernie, right, who was on this insurmountable climb, and the markets. One of the things that's interesting is the markets anticipated before it became the news cycle sort of mantra. Oh, Bernie's going to be unstoppable. Blah 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 blah. The markets anticipated that, and you could see, just like with the Kavanaugh nomination. I'm not sure it was superior information, probably, but it was probably other factors as well. But you can see the markets anticipating the rise or the demise of some of these candidates. So I wouldn't, um, we're in uncharted territory in a lot of these markets. I really don't know who's going to be the Democratic nominee. I mean, I really feel like I don't know.
So even though,
I know what
uh
the markets are saying.
yeah, and I by the and as I mentioned earlier, I have no bet on this at the moment because I kind of think the pricing's accurate in the sense that
It's
Biden's
efficient, you're saying.
yeah, yeah, I was saying it's efficient that Biden's got the delegates probably, but there's enough, questions about him that he's probably not priced as high as a similar candidate would be in a similar position. So I kind of think he's he's priced rationally, even though, like you say, he might lose. We don't really know. The only one, if thinking about it, Trump is probably a little mispriced on the popular vote right now. So he's trading at 26 cents, which sort of means, a 26% chance people, he will win the popular vote. It doesn't mean he'll only get 26% of the popular vote. It's more
Yes, that's right.
26% chance.
That's right.
And my guess is the reason he's probably mispriced, again, it's not that I think he's going to win it or lose it, but my guess is there's gonna be up to like, right now, we're sort of in this panicky period about coronavirus. He just had this press conference yesterday, so he's at a low point, and probably as we get more certainty markets loathe uncertainty. So
Yes.
as we get more certainty one way or the other involving coronavirus, and as we get closer to the Republican convention where typically nominees get a boost at their convention, my guess is 26 cents is at least he's gonna go up to 35 or 40 cents at some point. But again, that's the only one if I'm thinking about it now that I might place a bet on.
Right. Right.
And that's how I would think about it, but I'd have to look further.
Right. And how long does it take you before for the moment you have an investment thesis, let's call it that, unpredicted, how long does it is there a traditional or an average period of time you take before you put your money down?
Uh,
Is it weeks or is it days or
couple
is it
yeah, a day or two. But I'll tell you, Brexit, which was the first one I made, I did that instantly because and probably for all the wrong reasons, but I just wanted to experiment with placing bets on this. So for me, it was an experiment at first, and then I got obsessed, and I knew nothing about Brexit other than the fact that I didn't believe world leaders when they put dates on things, which has no basis in reality. It was just my opinion. But then I started researching and saw how many trade deals had to be put together. I saw this
Yeah.
stopgap with Ireland and Northern
Yeah.
Ireland. It was just too. it looked to me more and more like it wasn't gonna happen. I might have doubled down or at least thought about doubling down at one point because it was going against me for a while. But, most of the time it takes me a day or 2,
Right,
and
and when you
I'll
decide to dump something, are you thinking from the moment you first put that bet down? Are you starting thinking about or do you think about when you're gonna exit? I don't know, I mean, I'm just curious what your habits are.
it depends on the
Do you
market.
immediately start reevaluating the price?
Like Bloomberg, I was down from the moment I placed the bet, and then just on those days when there was rumors about Hillary Clinton being the VP, he shot up, so I was, like, hugely up, but I knew I had made a mistake in the initial bet, so I didn't even think about it, I
You
just
want
took
it
the bet
out.
off. Yeah.
You want it
So I
out.
was up. I wanna my mistake probably was
Heading for
staying
the
in.
exit, yeah.
I mean, I probably shouldn't have stayed in, but it got down so much so fast that I figured, "Okay, it's probably mispriced here." Given the fact that he's spending hundreds of millions of dollars, there's gotta be at least even if I got out negative, there's gotta be a better price that I was gonna get out.
Right, right, interesting, that's
So,
interesting.
that's you have to think like an investor. So,
Right,
investors, you have to look every day, not at whether you're up or down, but whether today's price is a good investment,
right,
and that you have to do the same thing in these things.
that's right.
So, look, I'd love to have you back
What
on
time
at
is
some
it
point.
anyway? Is it
Yeah,
uh,
you have to go. It's 1:27.
yeah, I gotta fly.
So I'd love to have you back
Wow, hour
and
and a half, boy.
yeah, I'd love to go over.
It's the fastest hour and a half I've spent
I
on it. This is
I
really fun,
yeah, no,
actually. I hope you
it's
guys enjoy this conversation. It's good.
it's great. So just one quick question: Who's made the most money on Predict It?
Who has?
Yeah,
It's some
how much did they make?
I don't know, but it's
Like, who much has anyone pulled out like $50,000 out of Predict It?
oh, yeah.
Even though $1,000 is
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
max you could put in.
Not on one, forecast. I
Right,
mean,
right, but just overall.
oh, yeah, definitely. Like,
That's
people who quit their jobs, they're like now, I'll give you another statistic. The average first-time deposit when somebody comes to the site, I'd be interested to know if it compares to the average first-time deposit when somebody comes to the site is $216.
it's probably close to mine.
That it's interesting. So you get and then what happens is some of them get washed out. They'll lose the money or they'll
Yeah.
withdraw the money or whatever it is. But what happens with most of them is they just start to get into it. And even if they take a spanking on the first investment, they figure there's a learning curve they go through, which is fascinating to
And
me.
how much
But
of
some
a
of these guys they're making enough to quit their Wall Street jobs.
I mean, really, that's
Yeah.
amazing. We're starting off with $1,000.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe, it's definitely a lot more than 50.
Oh, that's amazing. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of these leaderboards, some of these people are up thousands of percent. And do they tend to be up from, they bet big on one long shot and it happened,
No,
or they
no,
have like
no.
good, consistent bets?
No, they're in there. The guys that consistently are at in the top, you know, 400, 500 of the leader, those guys are people they don't make it on one. And I mean, and you have the tiers when people, some of these guys that have done very well lose some money, that and God help us if the question is worded ambiguously, which we don't make that mistake very often. But
No, In Trade had that mistake quite a bit.
yeah,
But
that takes actually we could have a whole session talking about how the questions are formulated, but we welcome market ideas from the traders, and sometimes it's just not practical, and sometimes it would violate the terms under which we can operate. We don't do those, obviously.
so, John, I'd love to do a part two of this where it would be great, like maybe in a few weeks or a month, we can just look at kind of the top trading markets and kind of just talk about each
Absolutely.
one. Maybe I'll even have like a political guy
Yeah.
or experts in the room as well. And the other thing we didn't get to, which is decentralized prediction markets, where the participant can pose events, and that's when you start to get into the assassination market thing
Yeah, yeah,
again. But there's like a cryptocurrency augur, I don't know how you
yeah,
say it,
yeah,
AUGUR, where people can make events. I don't know what kind of liquidity is there, or
yeah,
if anything. I don't know if that's going to get popular or not. I know at one point they reached out to me when I wrote about Predict It. They also reached out
yeah.
to me, and there's just a lot of fun stuff here.
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about this for a long time to come. It's definitely and we're not even halfway through the election season.
Well, and
So
if you're gonna when are you gonna launch the coronavirus market? And I
we're
hate
gonna
to
yeah,
it sounds almost insensitive, like, "Oh, I can't wait to bet on
yeah.
coronavirus," but it's
Well, I mean,
interesting.
so I don't know. We're actually sort of thinking through how we do this in a way that's tasteful, but at the same time is produces valuable information. I
Well,
mean,
it's
I don't know
valuable in
about
that.
you guys, but I wake up every day now, and it is in my consciousness as to is this how bad is this going to get? Just leave it at just that question. How bad is it going to get?
It's it
And I would love to have some empirical information other than what they're announcing all the time.
well
I'd
well
love to have some other data point to say, well, you know what? The odds are such and such that it's going to get this bad or this bad, or even in brackets. I'd like to know.
Right, which is why a prediction market would be valuable because I think there's so much just random news, and because nobody has skin in the game, you can write all these crazy articles about all these different theories that are just BS,
Yeah,
and a prediction market would solve a lot of
it would
those
give us some.
issues.
It would give us some another data point,
I
right?
mean, we've been obsessed with this too. We've done 3 podcasts now on coronavirus, which is not our thing at all to do topical
Right,
podcasts like that, but it's so much on people's minds. Like I said earlier, it's the only news in the newspaper
right.
right now. You can't even bet on anything else because nothing. It's like the rest of the world's frozen.
Yeah. So maybe we'll do some event at the. You mentioned you have a comedy club. I'll
Yeah,
mention this to Barstool and see what their plans are.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I
And they
and
know
then
the
I'll
club. They
put
know
you in
me.
touch with them, and
Yeah,
if that's something they want to do, because that would be a good chance to sort of interview some of the traders,
yeah. Oh,
which
I'd
is
love to
like
do that.
interesting because you get to see these. Those that's fascinating,
Yeah.
and you see them interacting with each other, and they're talking up the price or talking down the price, or uh,
Well
it's
well
great. Thank
well,
you very much
yeah,
for having me
John,
over.
thanks for coming on
Sure.
and plan about a month from now, coronavirus, allowing to come back and let's
Yeah.
do this again and talk about all these other issues
You got it.
and some of the markets. Thanks.
Thanks.